World of Tanks Miniatures game. This is a miniature war game based on the video game of the same name, which I played occasionally and never really got into it. I was pretty excited though when I saw that there was a tabletop version because I like miniature games. It was advertised as a game that comes with detailed painted miniatures of tanks. That sounds great, so I wanted to give it a try. What I have here and what I will review today is the base set, so we're gonna take a look at the mechanics of the game in general and also the components that you find in the base set. If you want anything else for larger battles, for example, then you have to invest more. The first thing that I have to point out is that the publisher and I must have different definitions of what a painted miniature is, because my definition includes painted. Theirs doesn't really. These miniatures, there are 4 of them. The game comes with 4 tanks. Frankly, they're cute enough, but they look a lot more like toy tanks than miniatures of tanks of the kind and with of the quality that we have been used to in the last decade or so by games that come with miniatures such as Wings of War, Wings of Glory, X-Wing. X-Wing in particular will come up again in this review because there are many similarities between that game and this one. So you get, with the base set, 4 toy tanks that are professionally painted. You get some 2-dimensional cardboard terrain to represent farms, walls, hills, forests, and things like that. Again, it's just a starter set and it's functional enough, although of course doesn't look all that great. At least probably at home you will have a nicer background, maybe like a green background. You won't be forced to film on a weird looking carpet like I am now. But it's 2020, I don't have game night, so my game table right now is occupied by a large jigsaw puzzle that I'm solving. We've all been there, right? It's 2020, so forgive the weird looking carpet. Each tank is associated to a card that has a lot of information on one side and some crucial information on the other side, which is just annoying. There's also not a lot of information. Just put everything on the same side. In particular, the one on the back tells you the unique capability of the kind of tank, and all the tanks that come in the base set are medium tanks. Small and large have different abilities. So the basic abilities are, well, the number of hit points, that is the number of damage points that the tank can take before being eliminated. Firepower, which is the number of dice that the player rolls when you attack with that die. Survivability, the base number of dice that you roll when defending. That will be incremented by a lot of other factors. Mobility, the number of times that a tank can move in a turn using the movement arrow. And finally, initiative, which tells us when the tanks act in a turn. Each turn, the tanks will move in increasing order of initiative from lowest to highest, but then they will fire in decreasing order of initiative from highest to lowest. And again, anybody who played X-Wings knows that there is a big similarity here. That is one of the core mechanics of that game, which we find here just exactly the same. Tanks also have a point cost. So at the beginning of a game, you will choose the scenario you want to play. You will choose how many points each player will have to create their forces. And so those points will be spent by acquiring tanks and also by adding upgrades that also have a cost up there. And simply, they will provide you with different benefits. Again, if you played X-Wing, you're familiar with that idea of customizing your forces using cards of this kind. So once you have decided on the scenario and you have assigned the tanks, it's time to get started. Again, tanks will activate in order of initiative, going up. And when you're moving a tank, you place the arrow anywhere attached to the tank, and then you move the tank anywhere as long as it will touch, it will be adjacent to the arrow, and it will be adjacent either parallel this way or perpendicular this way, and you have to stop the tank before the beginning of the triangle or the tip of the arrow. So suppose I want to move the tank twice, that would be a perfectly valid movement, and then I'm taking another movement here and I'm placing my tank right there. So that's how movement is. Clearly it's a little bit abstract. You should not imagine the tank jumping like this, but doing whatever kind of maneuvers it takes to go there. But sure, you have a lot of mobility, a lot of options. It almost feels like, you know, I can put it pretty much anywhere I want in this range in almost any orientation that I want. A lot of freedom there. And that's how you move with, of course, some things you cannot move through a farm. That would be an impassable obstacle. You cannot move there. You could, again, place an arrow so it goes there, and you can move all the way until you touch the farm. Now, as for firing, oh, actually another important thing about moving. After you move, you place a token. Suppose I move the tank twice, a token to indicate the number of times that I moved. That would be 2. And that's important because the more a tank moves, the harder it will be to hit it, but also the harder it will be for that tank to hit, which really makes sense. If you're stationary, you have more time to aim, more chances to hit, but you're also a better target for other tanks. So how do we resolve fire? Again, we go in order of initiative. You demonstrate you have a line of sight. Range is infinite, but there's nothing that comes with the game like, you know, like a little thread or anything like that to measure line of sight. So you can use a laser pointer. That's what the cool kids do. Get a ball of yarn, take it from the claws of your cat, and you can use that to measure line of sight, to check line of sight, because again, it's not about the distance. When you are firing, you fire the number of dice equal to the firepower of your tank. Each result looking like this is a regular hit. Each result like this one is a critical hit. And so suppose that I had those at the end of my roll. And then the opponent will get it, because I say I am attacking. Then the opponent, and I moved twice before attacking. Then the opponent gets to roll defense dice. So the base defense die is the survivability of the tank, which is 1 for all the tanks that come in here, plus 2, in this case, basically plus 1 die for each movement of the target, plus 2 dice for each movement of the firer, which, by the way, in this case shows you don't have enough dice. The game comes with 6 dice, and in this case, for the defender, I would need 5 because of that. So you have to keep in mind or make a note or whatever the hits, because you cannot, in many cases, simply leave the hits there while you resolve the attacks, while you resolve the attack dice. You may have other modifiers. For example, if the shooting tank is within 1 measured arrow from its target, then you reduce the defense dice. If it's a side shot, so you're firing at the side, you also reduce the dice, and the terrain may also modify. But the general idea is this, that you will roll defense dice, and then you will compare, Each result of this rolled on the defense dice will cancel a hit or a critical hit, as chosen by the shooting player. Each critical hit roll in the defense will cancel a hit or a critical hit as chosen by the target player. And after you do that, a number of hits may be left. For each normal hit, you take a point of damage and you place it next to the tank or on the card that indicates that tank. For each critical hit, you will draw a card that will indicate how many damage points that is worth, and also may apply other effects. You never seen this one, right? Well, yes, then you have never played Wings of no, you have never played X-Wing, but you have played X-Wing, most likely. It's 2020. The Specialist 2020 means many things. In this case, it means you have played that game, most likely. At the end of a turn, each tank may attempt to repair the effects of a critical card, in which case you simply roll a die, and if you roll anything but a blank, you repair that card. If the card had the repairable icon, many do. And again, in that phase, you roll any icon other than a blank during the repair phase at the end of a turn, and you remove that card. That's it. You remove at the end of the turn the movement tokens, and you continue like this, turn after turn, moving and firing until one of the players has achieved the victory objectives of the scenario. So what happens here is something that I've seen before in games inspired by video games. The publisher thinks, ooh, now we're gonna bring in a lot of people that don't play tabletop games regularly, but they're going to be attracted because of the intellectual property. But, you know, they're not used like us to learn complicated things. So we're going to dumb it down a little. We're going to water it down, make it easier than the standards of hobby tabletop gaming these days. And what you have is that when you water it down too much, then it tastes too much like water. This really feels like a version of X-Wing created by a publisher that doesn't trust their players to be able to handle X-Wing, and that's pretty much what there is. They took some of the core mechanics of X-Wings, which are good by themselves. They took away the one that truly is the linchpin that makes the game what it is, which is the pre-programmed movement. You're committed to a certain movement, and you do that secretly, and there is the bluffing element there. And so even if your initiative is not so great, even if you get to fire later by doing some really clever maneuvering, you're still going to be the only one that fires because you're the only one to be in position. So that pre-programming, when handled well, it can give a player an advantage even though their ships may not be all that great from the point of view of initiative. That to me is where the game is in Wings of War, and that is the one thing that they took away here, making therefore a game that looks really bland. I mean, you can't play World of Tanks, the miniatures game, without thinking of X-Wing and without missing X-Wing, because there's nothing here that X-Wing doesn't do better. Or that, again, there are a lot of stuff in X-Wing that X-Wing does very well that is not here at all. So again, if I compare the two games, the components, the miniatures from X-Wing look so much better because, wait for it, they are painted, and these ones just look a little bit sad that way. The terrain, the cards, all the components look better in X-Wing. Here they look subpar. But again, the real problem here is how the game looks like a sorely simplified version of X-Wing, and because of that it just feels bland in comparison, and I believe on its own. Because here, with so much power, with so much freedom of movement, you're not committed, then truly going later in movement gives you a disproportionate advantage. Once two tanks, one with a better initiative, make contact, the one with a better initiative will keep retaining that advantage, because simply there's nothing the other tank can do. You will always end up with the one with the best initiative in a good position compared to the other tank and firing first. Why? Because you're not committed to your movement. As the tank with the worst initiative goes first, then based on what they do, I'll go behind them and shoot them. I'll go to their side and shoot them. Without pre-programmed movement, going later gives you a disproportionate advantage. Now, The game system, though, is in such a way, the combat system, that you get to roll these big buckets of defensive dice, which, by the way, you don't have. The game doesn't come with enough dice for you to be able to do what you want to do, to have some dice record the hits and then the big buckets of defensive dice. Still, when you roll so many defensive dice, a lot of shooting will be for nothing. So what I like is a game that really emphasizes and gives value to good maneuvering, and so allows me to do that, to inflict a powerful hit. What you have here is a game that de-emphasizes, devalues maneuvering, because with better initiative you're always going to be in a good position, and also devalues hitting, because after you do that good-looking maneuver that was very easy to pull off, you don't really have all that much of an advantage at all, because with so many defensive dice, so many incoming hits are going to be reduced by that. So you have a game where you move a lot and easily, and it doesn't matter much because you're right there behind the tank and pew, 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 shooting there, and nothing happens there. So I don't know why I would, knowing X-Wing as most of us gamers do, why would I ever want to play this one instead? I guess there's this hook. Yeah, if they're trying to hook somebody who doesn't play tabletop games, they only played World of Tanks on their phone or on their computer, and now they have never heard of X-Wing, that's gonna be like, whoa, pretty good. But I believe that even for them, after a while, you realize that the advantage of the initiative is just too big to make the game interesting. Those cards may offset that, but some of those are a one-time benefit, or in order to get better initiative, I take a damage. So in any case, between the tank that has initiative always without penalties, and the one that is getting that initiative boost by using those limited resources, still, well, you can just wait them out until either they inflict so much damage on themselves that they're dead, or they reduce those, and then you go and prey on them that way. So you have a game that doesn't look nearly as good as X-Wing, doesn't play nearly as well, that in itself feels to me pretty bland and pretty basic, pretty uninteresting. Again, if I were to play it with some really young player, really some gamers, and I give them the tanks with the best initiative, maybe. But other than that, other than an introductory war game to somebody that really has no idea about war games and what a good war game and what a good miniature game look like, other than that, I don't really know what I will ever play World of Tanks miniatures games instead of better games such as X-Wing.